So today the topic that I wanted to go over is responsibility. I think responsibility is a very, very common word, so everyone's pretty familiar with what it means. But when it comes to an actual professional setting, like everyone avoids responsibility like it's the plague. Like no one wants it, no one wants to be around it. I think it's very, very interesting. Because I think when people are exposed to the concept of responsibility, it's always in a negative context. Like, you'll hear, you're responsible for this, or this is what you did, you need to take responsibility for it. Or, you might see it, even in social media, you might see it trending, this person refuses to take responsibility for A, B, and C. Whenever you hear about responsibility, it's typically not in a good context, like when the actual word responsibility is used. And I feel like that's why a lot of people avoid it. Because, so-and-so took responsibility for their actions is never something that's, to the extent of my knowledge, has ever made it into, trending or on the news. Someone actually being responsible, it's never, really talked about. So I think that's where a lot of the negative bias comes when it comes to wanting to actually take responsibility at work. And that's dead opposite of what you need to be doing, especially if you want to become a leader. So let's talk about what my personal definition of responsibility is. And I've heard so many lectures and talks about this, so I've just stolen bits and pieces from the different people who their definition just kind of clicks with me. I've also read quite a bit about it, so my version is just a collection of the bits and pieces that I've stolen from other people and that makes sense to me, and I've just kind of mushed them all together. So essentially, responsibility is your ability to influence a situation or a decision. Responsibility is like your power or your control when it comes to projects or decisions that you're involved in. If I'm able to take responsibility for something, that means that through a series of my own actions, my own conversations, my own behaviors, it led to this outcome. If I take responsibility for it, it means I brought it to this outcome. Good or bad, whatever the outcome is, it was my doing that got it there. And I think when you talk about that, that's really kind of where the scary concept comes out. Because, if people do something and it turns out good, great, good for them. If people do something and it turns out less than stellar, I think that fear just jumps out of people. Like, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. Oh my God, no one's going to want to work with me. Oh my God, everyone's going to think I suck. And that just really that just weighs people down, and it makes them want to stay away from, their opportunities to take responsibility. And I think that's just, I understand it because, I also grew up that way where I was just kind of learning that, responsibility is very, very high risk. But I think it's really, really important that people really kind of work on changing their perception of psychology, or not psychology, using this type of information to change, your psychology and your perception on responsibility. So I think another distinction that needs to be made is that, responsibility is basically a type of ownership over an action or a result or whatever it might be, a team. And there's another side to ownership, and that's blame. So whenever ownership is going to be discussed, it's either going to be someone being blamed or someone taking responsibility. And I'll just kind of talk about those two words real quick. Again, responsibility is you taking ownership of something. That's saying this result is a consequence of my actions or my decisions or my leadership. Good or bad, I take ownership for it. And blame is when ownership is pushed onto you or pushed onto someone else. This, testing went terribly. It is your fault. or we didn't, you know, hit the numbers that we needed to hit. This is this person's fault, or that person's fault, or this person, you know, was mean to me, which is why I couldn't focus this day, or this person gave me unclear instructions, which is why I couldn't get it done. Those are basically the two types of ownership. Ownership that you take for yourself, and ownership that's pushed on you or pushed on someone else. And I would hope that everyone would obviously know this, but responsibility is the way to go. Blame is not something that you want to be involved in. You don't want to be blaming others, and you don't want to have other people blaming you. So to nip that in the bud, just take responsibility for the things that you're involved in. Really, I mean, especially like when things go south and they don't turn out how you wanted them to, even if it's like terribly south and they just turned out worse than what you could possibly imagine. Really, in your head, picture someone who goes through that, and after the project or the task or the team, just everything went to shit, they were still able to look at all their team members dead in the eye and say, do you know what? I take responsibility for this. This went poorly, and it's a result of my decisions. This went poorly, and it's a result of my interactions with you, or it was my failure to provide, you know, correct insight or instructions or information. Whatever the path might have been to get us to this point, I take responsibility for it, and the results are under my umbrella of control. I mean, even if the results are poor, like, someone who's willing to own up for it and instantly take responsibility for it is amazing. Like, they're not even giving someone the chance to blame them. They're automatically putting themselves in a professional leadership, solid, dependable light, because they're willing to take ownership for something like that. And I have to say, responsibility is not just, it's not just saying the words like, I am responsible for this. It reminds me of that Office clip where Michael's like trying to file for bankruptcy, and he just thinks that he just walks into the office and says the words, you know, I declare bankruptcy. That means that, hey, he's done the bankruptcy thing. It's not at all like that. It's not just saying the words. Responsibility is ownership as well as action. It's saying that I did this, the results were good, I'm going to keep doing it, or I'm going to take some different actions to make them even better. I did this, the results were not good, I'm going to take action, change the way I do my job, and work on this project to improve the results, so they're not, you know, we're not going to have a repeat of a bad performance. So it's ownership and action, I think, when it comes to responsibility. I mean, really, if you're watching this, I assume it's because you want, you know, tips on how to operate well in a leadership role, or you eventually want to become a leader. And one of the biggest things that you can start today is first, stop running from responsibility. If you're running from responsibility, if you're hiding from it, if you're not trying to give people the chance to blame you for things, that's not a good spot to be in. You're not going to develop the kind of, you know, willingness to take responsibility. You're not going to develop the perspective that you need to see what you're responsible for and how your decisions led to that outcome, as well as you're just not going to build the grit that's needed to go through those difficult times to make it out and eventually get to the good times. So you really need to look at yourself professionally or even personally. Look at where you are with something. It can be in general or something specific, but just look at a result that you don't like. Think about how your actions and decisions led to that spot, and then take ownership of it. Say, do you know what? I did not, you know, get my college degree. I'm 40 years old, and, you know, I'm working 2 jobs that both pay me $12 an hour. If that's my situation, if I'm not happy with that situation, I need to look back in my life and see how my decisions led me there. I need to take ownership of it, and I need to decide to actually do an action to get me out of there. Whatever that action might be, it's going to start with taking responsibility for the decisions that got you there. Because if you're constantly blaming other people, saying, you know, well, my parents didn't get me a college fund, or I was in a bad neighborhood so I never got the opportunity, or, you know, I hung out with a bad crowd and it was never in with them, so it was never in with me. I mean, really, that's just blaming other people, blaming your parents, blaming your friends, blaming, you know, your neighborhood, whatever it might be. And like I said, responsibility is your ability to, you know, control situations. It's your power, it's your influence. If you are blaming other people, you are immediately giving that away. You're saying, hey, I'm helpless, I can't do anything. All these other people around me, they're the ones who have all the power, not me. And that is like so far from the truth, it's insane. And I know that there are going to be some people who watch this and they're going to think to themselves, well, no, in my one specific situation, or in, you know, my specific life, I didn't have all the power, or I didn't have any of the, you know, stuff that I needed, so I can't take responsibility. And honestly, that's just not true. That's bullshit. I mean, it sucks to hear, and I know it's direct, but it's honest. I mean, you can start taking responsibility today. You can make that decision of, do you know what? It might not be my fault, but it's my responsibility. That's actually a direct quote, I think, from a guy named Kerwin Ray, who puts out a lot of content, and I watched one of his lectures on this, and like when I heard it the first time, I was like, oh, just yeah, it might not be my fault that this situation ended up this way, or I'm at the place where I'm at, whatever it might be, but it is my responsibility, because shit happens in life. It happens to everyone, some people more than others, and it sucks, but that's life. Your ability to take responsibility for the stuff that you want to change is really the first solid step to actually making that change. So really, I think when it comes to taking responsibility, if you want a practical context, imagine working with someone. I'm sure most people can do this, but really a supervisor, a peer, maybe someone you supervise, whatever it might be, and imagine them just being on the extreme end and refusing to take responsibility for anything. They will not take responsibility for their service. They won't take responsibility for not hitting their deadlines. They won't take responsibility for their quality of work, you know, being crap. Whatever the issue is with them, it's always someone else's fault. Well, Jimmy was distracting me. I had to help Sarah, so I didn't have time to get my stuff done. Or, you know, whatever it might be. They just refuse to take responsibility for it. I am pretty confident that everyone's seen people like that in those moments. I would hope that you don't have someone who's like that 24/7, but I'm sure that you've probably seen someone in a situation where they just didn't want to take responsibility for a negative outcome, and really no one wants to work with that person. Like, in your life, professionally and professionally and personal, you're not going to have everything being perfect all the time. So when shit does go south, you need to be able to take responsibility for that. And people who just refuse to take responsibility never actually make any progress, because they never identify the issue, which is their own action. So if the issue is never identified, the issue is never addressed and changed and fixed. So they're just going to keep on doing the same crap over and over again, resulting in, you know, these poor outcomes, and they're just going to keep blaming other people, and that's the cycle that they're going to be in for the rest of their lives. And it's really, really unfortunate, because honestly, I can tell you right now, step one is accepting responsibility for your decisions. And I know that there are going to be people, again, there are going to be people who watch this, and they're just going to be like, no, that's not right. Other people are responsible, not me. And, you know, it sucks for those people, but really, if you're the one who's watching this, don't be that person. Don't be the one who decides, no, I can do this without being responsible or taking responsibility, because really, you're not going to get there. And that's, I'm not trying to shit talk anyone. I'm not trying to say that, you know, you'll never amount to anything or anything like that. I'm saying that if you want to get to the version of a leader that I would call a leader, you cannot get there if you do not have the ability to take responsibility for almost everything, if not everything, in your life, professional or personal. So getting back on track, you know, I said, imagine working with someone who doesn't take responsibility for anything. Go to the opposite end and imagine someone who takes responsibility for absolutely everything in their life. Again, same guy, Kerwin Ray, he called this extreme responsibility, I think. It's essentially everything that happens to me or that I'm involved in, I take responsibility for. If, you know, if I can't find a parking spot, what actions did I do that led to that, you know, situation? Well, I probably was taking my time leaving before... I was taking more time leaving than I needed to, which is why now there's no parking spots for me. If your issue is, you know, you didn't get a promotion at work, problem might be, hey, I haven't been bringing my A game to work every single day, and if I want that, I need to do it. Or maybe I haven't, you know, made a connection with the people who I need to show them, you know, how great my work actually is, because, you know, I don't really like socializing more than I have to. Even if I don't like it, that was my decision, that was my choice, and that led to the situation, and I accept responsibility for it. Really, I can tell you, I've supervised many people in many different positions, and, you know, you're going to have people under you who screw up sometimes. They don't hit a deadline. They're not following, you know, the things that they need to be following for their job description. They're just not meeting your expectations. And when it's noticed by people, you know, your peers who are, you know, next to you, or your supervisors who are even above you, and they have to come to you and say, you know, hey, person A is not doing what they're supposed to be doing. What's going on for that? Again, you have two options when it comes to ownership. You can either do blame, and you can say, yeah, they suck. I can't get them to listen. They have all the power. I have none of it. I'm going to write them up, or I'm going to fire them, or I'm going to do something. Because again, that's just putting all the power and influence on them. That's saying, I want one thing, they want another, and even though I supervise them, they still won. If the person that you supervise has more power and influence and responsibility than you do, you're in the wrong position. And the other choice, besides blame, is, of course, taking responsibility. You can say, do you know what? I supervise them. I didn't set the expectation well enough for them, or I didn't give them the support that they needed to make that, you know, accomplishment that they needed to actually make, or I didn't give them the training so that they could do this independently to the standard that we wanted. Whatever the issue is, the end result is my responsibility, and I will correct it. I will go work with them. I will support them. I will train them. I will give them what they need in order to get to that next level. Again, when you say their words, I'm responsible for this, people respond so well to it. Even if it's a negative thing, you showing that you're willing to take ownership for it gives people confidence in you. And really, in any given organization, it doesn't matter what the field is or how big the organization is or anything like that. In any type of company, there is a finite amount of responsibility that can potentially be taken, because there's a finite amount of, you know, jobs in that agency. There's a finite amount of projects that you're working on. There's a finite amount of opportunities that you have. Whatever it might be, there's only so much responsibility, and you really need to make sure that you are fighting for every single little bit that you can get, because people who have more responsibility, if you can't tell from that sentence, are the ones who have the more power, and they're the ones who are in those higher up positions. Really, if you are able to get more responsibility than the person who's supervising you, and you're able to, you know, execute it well, and you own every single error that happens, other people below you, your peers, other people above you who might not even directly supervise you, will notice that. They will see that. They will talk about that with each other. That word will spread, that this person takes responsibility for everything, even though they don't really need to. Even though it's not in their job description, they have to take responsibility. Even if it's not, you know, under their umbrella of control, they still take responsibility for it. That is something that people will talk about, and they will respond very, very well to. So again, I'm not even sure where I was. I just kind of got off track. I love this topic. Yeah, so like I was saying, in any given organization, there's a finite amount of responsibility, and you need to make sure that you are not casting blame to give yours up. You need to take all the power that you can get. The more power you have, the faster you will rise, the more you will learn, the more people will work with you. Really, there's nothing but good things. There are going to be some downsides sometimes, so I shouldn't say there's nothing but good things. In my experience and in my opinion, the goods will definitely outweigh the bads. There are going to be some days where the bads are going to suck shit and they're going to outweigh everything else. But in the long run, the goods will definitely outweigh the bads. So there's also a guy named Simon Sinek. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. But he talks about, motivation and leadership as well. And he had a quote that I heard a while ago and I liked it. And so I'm going to tweak it a bit because I don't remember exactly what he said. It was something like this, but it was essentially, do you know what you call it when you have an organization where everyone is constantly battling for responsibility? And the answer to that is a highly effective organization, because no one is interested in blaming, no one is interested in dodging things that they don't want to, be involved in. Everyone is trying to take ownership of their own actions. Everyone is trying to take ownership of each other's actions, which means that, you have to keep one-upping the people to your left and your right to take that ownership. And you perform better, your team performs better. Really, responsibility is fantastic. It is one of the key things you need to master in order to really be a leader. It shows maturity, it shows confidence, it shows that you're dependable, because you're not going to push your problems or blames off to other people, and really that you're worthy of trust. If you can show your team that you will take responsibility for your actions as well as your team's actions, that inspires confidence. That is something that people will flock to, and that is something that people will follow you for. That is Leadership 101.